The ceiling fan in my Marbella apartment didn't so much circulate the air as it did rearrange the dust. It groaned with a rhythmic, metallic clicking, a sound that reminded me of a faulty Webley revolver I'd once encountered in a damp basement in East Cheap. Outside, the Mediterranean sun was a white-hot hammer, pounding the cobblestones of the Calle San Lazaro, but inside, I maintained the necessary fictions of an Englishman abroad. I wore my waistcoat. I drank my Earl Grey. And I waited for the world to stop making sense. Lola burst in without knocking, the smell of salt water and cheap gasoline trailing behind her like a cape. She was wearing a shredded denim jacket despite the 30-degree heat, her dark hair tied back with a bandana that looked suspiciously like a stolen silk scarf. "Silas, you look like a waxwork in a museum," she said, tossing a manila envelope onto my scarred oak desk. "And you're sweating through your dignity. Stop being so British and open the windows. The heat is an adversary, Lola. One does not negotiate with it," I replied, my voice dry as a Dorset quarry. I reached for the envelope. "Who is our visitor?" "She's downstairs in a silver Mercedes-Benz AMG. The kind that costs more than this entire block," Lola said, leaning against the doorframe and lighting a cigarette. Not hers, I noted. The aroma was distinct. Sobrany Black Russian. I hadn't smelled that particular blend of tobacco and charcoal since a poker game in Tangier. "Sofia Valero," I murmured, reading the name on the embossed card inside the envelope. "The sherry money. The scared money," Lola corrected. "She looks like she's seen a ghost, or a tax auditor. Same thing for people in Sotogrande." A moment later, Sofia Valero entered. She was the sort of woman who wore her wealth like armor, well-tailored cream linen, a Cartier tank watch strapped to a slender wrist, and the unmistakable, Spanish earth, lipstick that left a matte, terracotta stain on everything it touched. But her hands were trembling. "Mr. Croft," she began, her English perfect, polished at some Swiss finishing school. "I am told you are a man of logic, that you do not believe in the supernatural." "I believe in what I can weigh, measure, and smoke," I said, gesturing to the chair. "Sit. Tell me why you're haunted." She sat, her back straight as a spear. "My sister, Elena, died 10 years ago. A midnight crash on the A369 near Ronda. The car went over the ridge and burned. The dental records were conclusive. I buried her in the family vault." I watched a bead of condensation run down my teapot. And now, she is spending her inheritance," Sophia said. She reached into her Hermes clutch and pulled out a slip of thermal paper. "This is a bank notification from yesterday. A transfer of €5,000 from a dormant account in Gibraltar. An account that only Elena and I knew the access codes for. The digital signature used to authorize it is an exact replica of her handwriting. Not a forgery, Mr. Croft. A biological match." I leaned forward, the heat forgotten. "Handwriting is a matter of muscle memory and nerve. It can be mimicked, though rarely to the point of fooling a modern banking algorithm. There is more," Sophia whispered. She produced a small glass vial. Inside was a single cigarette butt, charred and stamped with the gold foil of a Sobrany Black Russian. "I found this morning. In the guest wing of my villa in Sotogrande. The wing has been locked since the funeral. I am the only one with the key. And yet the room smelled of her perfume, lavender and old paper." Lola whistled low. "A ghost with a bank account and a smoking habit. My kind of girl." "It isn't a joke, Lola," I snapped. I turned back to Sophia. "Sotogrande is a fortress. Private security, gated entries. Biometric scanners at the main port. How did she get in?" "She didn't," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "According to the security logs, nobody entered the estate. But at 3:14 a.m., the harbor master's gate recorded the use of an old ID card. A card that belonged to Elena. A card I watched the police crush in the wreckage 10 years ago." I stood up, reaching for my hat. The game was no longer afoot, it was sprinting. Lola, get your phone. I need the architectural blueprints for the Valero Villa, specifically the service tunnels from the 1970s. Sophia, we are going to Sotogrande. I want to see that guest wing before the scent of lavender fades. As we walked to the door, the telephone on my desk rang. It was a sharp, jagged sound in the quiet room. I picked it up. There was no voice on the other end. Only the rhythmic, haunting sound of someone humming a Spanish folk song, a lullaby I recognized from the mountains of Ronda. Then, a click, and the dial tone returned. What was it? Lola asked, her eyes sharp. A warning, I said, feeling a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the fan. Or an invitation. The drive to Sotogrande Alto was a 40-minute exercise in silence, punctuated only by the hum of the Mercedes tires against the asphalt. Sotogrande isn't like the rest of the Costa del Sol. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It's a sprawl of manicured polo fields, hidden helipads, and villas shielded by cork oaks and high stone walls. It's where the world's elite come to be invisible. We pulled up to the gates of Los Sombros. The architecture was a brooding neo-Mujar nightmare, red brick, horseshoe arches, and intricate geometric tile work that seemed to shift as the sun moved. The security here is top-notch, Mr. Croft, Sophia said, her voice tight. The perimeter is swept every hour. The cameras have thermal sensors. A cat couldn't cross the lawn without being logged. And yet a ghost smokes in your guest wing, I remarked, stepping out into the heat. A man was waiting for us by the heavy oak front door. He was built like a coastal fortification, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wearing a crisp safari jacket that didn't quite hide the bulge of a 9mm Beretta under his arm. Marcus Thorne, Sophia introduced him. Chief of Security for the estate. Marcus, this is Silas Croft and his associate. Thorne gave me a look that usually precedes a police interrogation. Mr. Croft. I've heard of you. You're the one who found the stolen Goya in that fishing boat in Estepona. I should tell you, I don't like freelancers on my turf. And I don't like puzzles that involve dead women spending money, Thorne, I replied. It offends my sense of bookkeeping. Lola was already wandering toward the side of the house, her eyes glued to her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen. Thorne, your server room, is it still running on the 2022 firmware? She asked without looking up. Thorne stiffened. The system is proprietary and secure. Don't touch anything, kid. Kid? Lola smirked. I've seen more security holes in your perimeter than in a slice of manchego. You've got a blind spot near the old drainage canal by the third polo field. Thorne opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off. The guest wing, Sophia. If you please. Inside, the villa was cool, the air smelling of beeswax and old stone. The guest wing was a separate corridor, isolated by a heavy iron gate. Sophia unlocked it with a key she kept on a silver chain. The room was frozen in time. A four-poster bed, heavy velvet drapes, and a vanity table covered in a thin layer of dust. But the smell was there, lavender, sharp and floral, cutting through the mustiness. I walked to the vanity. My eyes caught something. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a pair of silver tweezers, and moved a heavy armchair an inch to the left. Tucked into the crease of the upholstery was a pair of tortoiseshell reading glasses. I held them up to the light. Do you wear these, Sophia? No, she said, squinting. I have perfect vision. Elena was the one who was nearsighted. Interesting, I murmured. I examined the lenses. They were bifocals, a specific prescription. These aren't 10 years old. The frames are a modern silhouette, maybe 2 years old at most. And the hinges are oiled. I moved to the window. It overlooked the cliffs. Below, the Mediterranean churned against the rocks. The glass was spotless. Too spotless for a room that had been locked for a decade. Thorne, I said, not turning around. You mentioned the perimeter is swept hourly. When was the last time you checked the cellar access? The old tunnels used for the irrigation system? Thorn's face went the color of a rare steak. Those were sealed with concrete in the 90s. Nobody gets in that way. Then we have a miracle, I said, pointing to the floor. Near the baseboard, a single, perfectly formed footprint in the dust. It wasn't a ghost's footprint. It was a woman's shoe, a size 5, narrow heel, the kind worn by someone who walks with a slight, rhythmic limp. Suddenly, a muffled thud echoed from behind the walls, a heavy, mechanical sound, like a bolt sliding into place. Lola came sprinting into the room, her face pale. Silas! The security logs just went dark. Not a glitch, somebody just triggered a manual override from inside the house. And Thorn, your Mercedes just started its engine. We ran to the balcony. Below us, Sophia's silver AMG was roaring to life. But Sophia was standing right next to me. The driver turned their head for a split second. A woman's face, identical to Sophia's, looked up at us. She wasn't pale or ghostly. She looked vibrant, her eyes burning with a cold, calculated fury. She raised a hand, blowing a kiss toward the balcony, and slammed the car into gear. Elena, Sophia whispered, her hand clutching her throat. Stay here! I shouted to Thorn. But as I turned to the door, I realized the iron gate we had entered through was now closed. Locked. And the smell of lavender was being replaced by something else, something sharp, chemical, and highly flammable. Lola, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Tell me you brought your lockpicks. Left them in my other pants, she hissed, looking at the smoke beginning to curl under the door. But I brought something better. She pulled a small, heavy cylinder from her jacket. A flashbang. Close your eyes, Silas. This is going to ruin the upholstery. The explosion wasn't a roar. It was a sharp, pressurized crack that sent a shockwave through the floorboards. Lola hadn't used a flashbang. She'd used a localized thermite strip she'd likely borrowed from a shipyard in Algeciras. The iron lock on the gate didn't just break, it liquefied. Move! I commanded, grabbing Sophia by the elbow. We burst through the settling soot. The corridor was filling with a thick, yellowish haze. I pressed a silk handkerchief to my mouth. Don't inhale deeply. That's not just smoke, it's sulfur and potassium nitrate. A diversionary smoke pot, crude but effective. Thorn was coughing violently, his hand clawing at his holster. The car, she's got the car. Forget the car, Thorn, I snapped, my eyes scanning the floor of the hallway. The car is a loud, silver distraction. Look at the shadows. I knelt despite the haze. On the white marble floor, leading away from the guest wing but toward the interior of the house, was a series of damp, oily smudges. Not footprints, but the marks of someone who knew exactly where to step to avoid the pressure sensors Thorn was so proud of. Lola, track the AMG's GPS, I ordered. I'm on it, she muttered, her thumbs flying across her screen. Wait, that's weird. The car is heading straight for the Al-Qaidisa gate, but its speed is constant. Exactly 60 kilometers per hour. No braking, no acceleration. Cruise control, I said, the pieces clicking into place. A brick on the pedal or a hacked interface. Your sister isn't in that car, Sophia. Sophia leaned against the wall, her face a mask of pale terror. Then where is she? She was right there, looking at us. A theatrical performance, I replied. A wig, a remote starter, and a well-timed exit. Thorn, check the security room. Now. I suspect your impenetrable system hasn't just been bypassed, it's been looped. Thorn didn't argue this time. He sprinted toward the west wing. I turned my attention back to the smudges on the floor. I touched the residue and sniffed it. Not seawater. Not rain. Hoof oil. The heavy, lanolin-rich grease used in the stables. The stables, I murmured. Lola, stay with Sophia. Lock yourselves in the study. If anyone who isn't me or Thorn tries to enter, use that other toy you're hiding in your jacket. It's a taser, Silas. And I've got 2 charges. She grinned, though her eyes remained wary. I left them and navigated the villa's labyrinthine gardens toward the equestrian complex. The air in Sotogrande usually smells of jasmine and money, but as I approached the stables, the scent of horse sweat and leather took over. The stables were a cathedral of mahogany and brass. 16 stalls, most of them empty this time of year. At the far end, I saw a light flickering. "Esteban?" I called out, my voice echoing off the rafters. No answer. Only the restless shifting of a bay gelding in the nearest stall. I moved toward the tack room. The door was ajar. Inside, the walls were lined with saddles that cost more than a London flat. On the central work table sat a bottle of Spanish brandy, half empty, and a single, pristine white envelope. Beside the envelope lay a small, rusted object, a silver locket, scorched and twisted by extreme heat. I picked it up with my handkerchief. I recognized it from the police reports I'd memorized on the train. It was the locket Elena Valero was supposedly wearing the night her car plummeted into the gorge at Ronda. The hinges were fused shut, but the initials EV were still visible. "You should not have come here, Englishman." The voice was raspy, thick with a heavy Andalusian accent. I turned to see Esteban, the old horse master. He was holding a short-barreled shotgun, a greener 12-gauge, leveled directly at my chest. His hands weren't trembling. "The dead should stay in the ground," Esteban said, his eyes milky with cataracts but his aim steady. "Sophia thinks she wants the truth, but the truth in this family is a poison. I have a high tolerance for toxins, Esteban," I said, keeping my hands visible. "Did you give her the keys? Or did she never really leave?" Esteban's finger tightened on the trigger. "She died in Ronda. I saw the fire. I saw the smoke. Then who just left a fresh Sobranie cigarette in your ash can?" I gestured to the corner of the room. A floorboard creaked behind me. A cold, metallic pressure pressed against the back of my neck. "Drop the trinket, Mr. Croft," a woman's voice whispered, a voice identical to Sophia's, but colder, stripped of all vulnerability. "And tell your little bird in the study to stop trying to hack my accounts. Or the next thing that explodes won't be a door." I didn't drop the locket. Instead, I tightened my grip. "You're making a mistake, Elena. Or should I call you by the name on the Gibraltar bank account?" The pressure of the gun barrel increased. The cold, circular rim of a suppressor pressed firmly into the hollow behind my ear. It was a professional's touch, not too hard to trigger a flinch, but firm enough to remind me that a single gram of pressure on a trigger would turn my deductive faculties into a messy mural on the tack room wall. "The Walther PPK," I said, my voice as level as a horizon. "A classic choice. 7.65 millimeters. Reliable, concealable, and remarkably quiet when fitted with a threaded barrel. It's the weapon of someone who prefers to clean up their own messes." "You talk too much, Englishman," the woman whispered. The scent was different now. Up close, the lavender was gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of gun oil and a faint, expensive hint of Chanel No. 19. "Drop the locket. Now." I let the scorched piece of jewelry fall. It hit the wooden floor with a hollow, tinny clack. "It's too light, isn't it?" I asked. "Genuine silver would have a deeper resonance. This is pewter, plated to look like the real thing. A prop. Just like the car, just like the smoke, and just like that limp you've been faking." Behind the shotgun, Esteban's eyes flickered. The barrel of his greener 12-gauge dipped an inch. "Pewter?" he muttered. "But the police, they said. The police saw what they were meant to see in a burnout wreck on a dark Ronda road," I said, tilting my head slightly toward the woman behind me. "Esteban, you've lived with the Valero family for 40 years. You know the way a horse recognizes its rider. You know the gait of the women you taught to ride. This woman behind me, she walks with the grace of a dancer, not the slight leftward tilt Elena developed after her fall in the 2012 Polo Open. Tell me, who are you protecting?" "He's protecting the bloodline," the woman hissed. "No," I countered. He's protecting a secret that died 10 years ago. Sophia didn't hire me to find a ghost. She hired me to prove she wasn't insane. But the bank account in Gibraltar, the one registered to Isabella de Mello, that wasn't Elena's secret name. It was the name of your grandmother's estate in Seville. The estate that was liquidated to pay off a gambling debt your father incurred in Tangier. The woman pulled back the hammer of the Walther. The mechanical click was loud in the silence of the stables. You think you're so clever. You think logic solves everything. But logic doesn't stop a bullet. Suddenly, the intercom on the stable wall crackled to life. It wasn't the voice of a security guard. It was Lola. Silas? If you can hear me, don't move. I've just finished bypassing the villa's internal thermal grid. Thorn isn't in the security room. He's in the basement, and he's not alone. He's got a crate of industrial-grade accelerant. He's not planning on catching a ghost, Silas. He's planning on burning the evidence. All of it. Including the client. The woman behind me stiffened. Thorn? That idiot was supposed to wait. Thorn doesn't wait for anyone when there's 5 million euros at stake. I said. He's a mercenary, and you've lost control of him. He's going to turn Las Sombras into a funeral pyre, and you'll be the prime suspect, the resurrected sister who came back for revenge. Esteban looked from me to the woman. His face crumpled into a mask of realization and rage. He has Sophia? In the basement? With the wine cellar vents, I said, my mind racing through the blueprints Lola had shown me. If he lights it there, the whole west wing becomes a chimney. She won't last 5 minutes. The woman's grip on the Walther faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of hesitation that told me she wasn't a cold-blooded killer, just a desperate player in a game that had grown too large for her. Esteban! I shouted. The shotgun! Before she could adjust her aim, Esteban swung the heavy wooden stock of his greener. It didn't hit the woman, it hit the light fixture above her head. The tack room plunged into darkness. I dropped to the floor, rolling toward the smell of the bay gelding. A shot rang out, the muffled thwip of the suppressed Walther, and a splinter of wood bit into my shoulder. Lola! I yelled into the darkness, reaching for the locket on the floor. The vents! Tell Sophia to get to the vents! I can't! Lola's voice was frantic over the intercom. The signal's being jammed! Silas, the house is already starting to smoke! Through the open stable door, I saw a lick of orange flame erupt from the basement windows of the villa. The mirror was no longer a game of shadows. The house of Valero was beginning to melt. The bay gelding screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the darkness of the stables like a jagged blade. In the chaos of the blackened tack room, the woman's scent, that expensive, icy Chanel No. 19, was fading. I heard the scuff of a designer heel against the straw, a frantic retreat toward the rear exit. Let her go, Esteban! I barked, crawling toward the doorway. The house is the priority! I burst out into the night air. The villa was no longer a silent monument to wealth. It was a breathing beast of fire. Thick, oily smoke, smelling of high-octane racing fuel and old tapestry, rolled across the manicured lawn. The thermodynamics were clear. The fire was being fed from the basement, drawn upward by the central ventilation shaft like a furnace. Lola was a shadow near the terrace, her laptop glowing like a terminal in the dark. Silas! The internal sprinklers are locked out. Thorn didn't just jam the signal. He physically severed the main riser in the garage. And the basement door is mag-locked from the inside. Then we don't go through the door, I said, my lungs burning as I reached her. Lola, the irrigation system. The high-pressure pumps for the polo fields. Can you reverse the flow into the garden hydrants? I can try, but that'll only soak the grass, Silas. Sophia is in the wine cellar, 2 levels down. The smoke will settle there first. Not if I change the pressure, I muttered, stripping off my waistcoat. I soaked it in a nearby decorative fountain. The old tunnels, Lola? You mentioned the drainage canal. If Thorn is using accelerants, he needs oxygen. He's left a vent open somewhere, or the fire would have choked itself by now. The service lift, she realized, her fingers blurring. There's a manual override in the pool house. But Silas, if you go down there, you're walking into a chimney. Dying in a wine cellar is a quintessentially British end, wouldn't you say? I managed a grim smile, tied the wet silk over my face, and ran toward the pool house. The descent was a descent into a private hell. The service lift shaft was a vertical tunnel of soot. I didn't use the elevator. I climbed down the grease-slit cables, the heat radiating through my leather gloves. My boots hit the concrete floor of the sub-basement with a heavy thud. The air here was thick with the smell of scorched earth and expensive vinegar. Thousands of bottles of vintage Rioja were shattering under the heat. Through the haze, I saw Thorn. He wasn't the professional soldier anymore. He was a man possessed, splashing translucent liquid from a jerrycan onto a pile of old account ledgers and legal files. And there, slumped in a corner, bound with heavy plastic zip ties, was Sophia. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the man she had trusted to protect her. "Thorn!" I shouted. My voice was a rasp. The security chief spun around, his face slick with sweat and soot. He didn't reach for his gun. He held a Zippo lighter, its flame dancing with a malicious cheer. "You're late for the auction, Croft," Thorn sneered. "The Valero legacy is being liquidated. All of it. Including the sister who didn't exist and the one who survived." "Logic, Thorn," I said, stepping over a puddle of spilled Malvasia. "You can't kill us both and walk away. The woman in the stables, your Elena, she's already fled. She won't cover for you. You're the only one left in the burning building with the matches. She's not going anywhere." Thorn laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "Because she doesn't exist without me. She's a ghost I built from a nightclub dancer and a plastic surgeon's bill. But you're just an interloper." He flicked the lighter toward the fuel. But I wasn't looking at the flame. I was looking at the vent behind him. A small, rhythmic click-clack sounded from the shadows. A hand, slender and pale, reached through the darkness of the ventilation grate. It wasn't holding a gun. It was holding a heavy, brass-bound ledger, the very thing Thorn thought he was destroying. "The ghost has a mind of her own, Thorn," a voice whispered from the vent. The lighter hit the floor. The fuel ignited in a terrifying lump of blue flame. But as the wall of fire rose between us, I saw the woman's face behind the grate. It wasn't the dancer. It wasn't Sophia. It was a face that should have been bone and ash for a decade. "Silas!" Lola's voice screamed from my earpiece. "The roof is shifting! Get out of there!" The ceiling groaned. A massive oak beam, charred and heavy, began to buckle directly above Sophia. The oak beam didn't fall all at once. It surrendered with a series of agonizing, splintering cracks. I lunged across the slick floor, my boots skidding through a mixture of spilled Cabernet and diesel fuel. I reached Sophia a heartbeat before the ceiling gave way, throwing my weight against the heavy, wrought iron wine rack. The metal groaned, the Victorian-era craftsmanship of the rack acting as a makeshift brace, catching the charred timber inches above Sophia's head. "Silas!" she choked out, her lungs fighting the thickening soot. "Don't speak. Breathe through the silk," I commanded, slicing through her plastic restraints with a jagged shard of a broken bottle. My hands were slick with red wine and sweat, a grim parody of blood. Across the room, the wall of fire was a living thing. Thorn stood on the other side of the inferno, his silhouette distorted by the heat haze. He raised his Beretta, the barrel glinting in the orange light. He wasn't aiming for me. He was aiming for the high-pressure gas line running along the ceiling. "If I'm going down, Croft, I'm taking the inheritance with me," Thorn roared. A shot rang out, not from Thorn's Beretta, but from the ventilation grate. It was the sharp, distinctive crack of a small-caliber weapon. The bullet struck the brickwork inches from Thorn's head. The woman in the vent wasn't trying to kill him. She was pinning him down. "Lola! Now!" I screamed into my collar mic, hoping the heat hadn't melted the transmitter. Incoming! Lola's voice was a distorted squawk. I've bypassed the main irrigation valves. I'm dumping 30,000 liters of pool water into the ventilation shafts. Get to the high ground, Silas! A second later, a sound like a subterranean freight train erupted from the vents. A torrent of chlorinated water, mixed with mud and debris, burst through the grates. It hit the basement floor with the force of a tidal wave. The transition was violent, fire meeting water in a blinding explosion of scalding steam. I grabbed Sophia, pulling her up onto the heavy mahogany-tasting table as the water swirled around our knees, instantly cooling the air but plunging us into a gray, sightless world of vapor. Thorn? Sophia gasped, her voice trembling. Gone, I said, squinting through the steam. The spot where Thorn had stood was empty, the fire there extinguished into a hissing pile of black ash. I turned my attention to the ventilation grate. It had been buckled outward by the force of the water. The woman was gone, but she had left something behind, wedged into the metal lattice. I reached into the receding water and pulled it out. It was a medical bracelet, the kind used in high-end private clinics. It was charred, but the name on the plastic insert was still legible under the grime: Valero, E. Patient 7042, San Pedro Psychiatric. She was never in the grave, Sophia, I whispered, the steam curling around us like a shroud. And she wasn't in the car. Then who did I bury? Sophia's voice was a ghost of itself. That, I said, looking toward the dark tunnel of the service lift, is the €5 million question. We scrambled out of the basement through the mud-clogged service tunnel, emerging into the cool night air of the gardens. The villa was a skeletal ruin, the upper floors still glowing with internal embers. Emergency sirens were finally wailing in the distance, the delayed response of a security system that had been systematically gutted from the inside. Lola was waiting by the gates, her face smudged with soot, holding a tablet that was displaying a grainy, night vision feed. I caught her on the perimeter cam, Lola said, showing me the screen. A figure in a dark coat was limping through the cork oaks at the edge of the estate. But as I watched the footage, I noticed something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The woman on the screen wasn't limping on her left leg anymore. She was favoring her right. She's changing her gait, Lola noted, her eyes sharp. Or there's more than one ghost in these woods, I finished. I looked down at the medical bracelet in my hand. Then I looked at Sophia, who was shivering in a shock blanket. I reached out and gently took her hand, the hand that had been bound with zip ties. I looked at the red marks on her wrists. Sophia, I said softly, tell me about the third sister. Sophia froze. The sirens grew louder, their blue lights dancing against the ruins of Los Sombros. Sophia's face didn't just go pale, it turned the color of a winter fog over the Thames. She looked at her wrists, then at the charred medical bracelet in my hand, and for a moment, the poised heiress of the Valero estate vanished. In her place sat a terrified child. The third, she was never meant to be part of the world, Silas, Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the dying fire. My mother didn't have twins. She had triplets. Elena, myself, and Beatrice. Lola leaned in, her eyes wide. Triplets? In a family this famous? How do you keep a whole human being a secret for 30 years? By having enough money to build your own walls, I answered for her, my eyes fixed on the blue lights of the approaching Guardia Civil. And by owning a private clinic like San Pedro. Beatrice was the darkness to your light, wasn't she, Sophia? The one born with the broken mind. She wasn't broken, Sophia snapped, a flash of defensive fire returning to her eyes. She was different. Violent. Uncontrollable. When the accident happened in Ronda 10 years ago, it wasn't just Elena and me in that car. Beatrice was in the back. She caused the crash. She grabbed the wheel because she wanted to see the birds in the canyon. I felt the weight of the tragedy settle in my bones. And Elena died. You survived. But what happened to Beatrice? My father couldn't handle another scandal, Sophia said, tears finally carving tracks through the soot on her cheeks. He bribed the coroner. Elena was buried. Beatrice was sent back to San Pedro under Elena's name. We traded a dead sister for a hidden one. We thought she was safe. Until a month ago, when the clinic called. Beatrice had walked out of a high-security wing. She didn't leave like a patient, she left like a ghost. Silas, we've got company, Lola interrupted, nodding toward the driveway. Two dark SUVs with the green markings of the Guardia Civil were screaming up the gravel path. But they weren't stopping at the main entrance. They were flanking the perimeter, their headlights cutting through the smoke like searchlights. They aren't here for the fire, I said, grabbing my coat. Thorne was security chief, but he had friends in high places. If Beatrice is out there, she's a liability to everyone who signed those fake death certificates 10 years ago. Sophia, if you stay here, you'll be protected into silence. Where do we go? Sophia asked, trembling. Lola, the old fisherman's shack in El Palo, I ordered. The one with the rusted citron in the yard. It's the last place anyone would look for a Valero. We slipped into the shadows of the cork oaks just as the first team of officers burst onto the terrace. We moved like ghosts ourselves, navigating the dense undergrowth until we reached the perimeter fence. Lola had already cut a hole in the chain link behind the stables. We reached my battered, oil-leaking Jaguar hidden half a mile down the road. I threw the car into gear, the engine growling a protest against the sudden exertion. Silas, Lola said from the back seat, her laptop open on her knees. I've been digging into the San Pedro records while you were playing hero. That medical bracelet? Patient 7042? There's a note in the digital file, encrypted behind a military-grade firewall. Read it, I said, my eyes on the rearview mirror. It's a dosage log, Lola murmured, her brow furrowed. They weren't giving her sedatives. They were giving her high doses of scopolamine and memory-altering drugs. And there's a signature on the daily authorization. It's not a doctor's name. Whose is it? Lola looked up, her face grim in the glow of the screen. Bernardo Rivos. Your family lawyer, Sophia. He wasn't just managing the trust, he was managing the patient. Suddenly, a heavy thud rocked the car. A black sedan had pulled up beside us on the narrow coastal road, its tinted windows hiding the driver. The sedan swerved, its metal flank grinding against the Jaguar with a shower of sparks. Hold on! I shouted, gripping the wheel. As I fought to keep the car on the road, the sedan's window rolled down. A hand emerged, holding a heavy-caliber handgun. But the shooter wasn't aiming for the tires. They were aiming for Sophia. The first shot shattered the rear windshield. Underscore 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 underscore. Part 8. The roar of the .45 caliber rounds smashing through the rear glass was like a hammer hitting a crystal chandelier. Glass shards, fine as diamond dust, sprayed across the leather interior. Sophia screamed, diving into the footwell, but Lola didn't flinch. She was already reaching into the glove compartment, her eyes fixed on the black Audi RS6 that was trying to ram us off the cliffside road. Silas, the left rear tire is smoking! Lola yelled over the wind. If we hit the N340 curve at this speed, we're going into the Mediterranean. The Jaguar was built for endurance, Lola, not for ballistic testing. I grunted, wrestling the heavy wooden steering wheel. I shifted down into third, the engine screaming in protest as I swung the car's long nose toward the Audi. I didn't pull away. I slammed the Jaguar's flank into the Audi's front wing. The sound of grinding steel was deafening. I saw the shooter for a split second through the tinted glass, a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by a tactical balaclava. Professional. Lola, the flare gun! I commanded. In the leather kit under your seat. Aim for the Audi's intake, not the driver. Lola didn't ask questions. She popped the latch, leaned out of the shattered window with the grace of a circus performer, and fired. The orange magnesium flare hissed through the air, a streak of artificial sun that disappeared into the Audi's front grille. A moment later, a plume of thick, white smoke erupted from the Audi's engine bay as the magnesium ignited the plastic cooling fans. The black car swerved, its brakes locking up, and vanished into the darkness of the mountain pass behind us. Did we get them? Sophia sobbed from the floor, her cream linen suit now stained with grease and glass. We bought 5 minutes, I said, my heart hammering a rhythmic code against my ribs. Lola, check the GPS. We need the backroads through the Arroyo de la Miel. Avoid the toll roads, they have cameras with plate readers. We reached the fisherman's shack in El Palo an hour later. It was a weather-beaten hut tucked between a salt-bleached warehouse and a row of rusted sardine boats. The air here didn't smell of Sotogrande's jasmine. It smelled of rotting kelp, diesel, and old nets. I led them inside. The interior was a single room, lit by a buzzing fluorescent bulb. I sat Sophia down on a wooden crate and turned to Lola. The dosage log, I said, my voice cold. Show me the dates. Lola opened her laptop, the screen reflecting in her dark eyes. Here. Rivos authorized a maximum dose of memory suppressants every 3 days for 10 years. But look at the last entry, Silas. It was made 48 hours after Beatrice supposedly escaped. Then she didn't escape, I murmured, pacing the small room. She was released. Or moved. I turned to Sophia. Your lawyer, Bernardo Rivas. He's been the executor of the Valero Trust since your father died. If Beatrice is legally dead, who receives her share of the inheritance? It stays in the trust, Sophia whispered. Managed by the law firm until I marry or reach 40. It's millions, Silas. Millions that nobody can touch but him. Logic suggests he wasn't just hiding a sister, I said, stopping in front of a salt-crusted window. He was farming her. Using her as a biological key to access funds that required her signature or biometric data. But why stop now? Why the fire? Why the ghost sightings? Because of the audit. Lola interrupted, her fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on the keyboard. I just cracked Rivas's private server. The Spanish tax authorities, the Hacienda, started a deep dive into the Valero offshore accounts last month. Rivas needed a scapegoat. He needed Beatrice to reappear, cause a tragedy, and then die again in a way that burns all the paperwork. Including you, Sophia, I added. Suddenly, the shack's door creaked. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of a heavy, polished shoe stepping on a loose floorboard. I reached for the heavy iron fire poker by the hearth, but before I could move, the door swung open. It wasn't a gunman. It was a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the humidity of the coast. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a heavy, silenced pistol in the other. Mr. Croft, Bernardo Rivas said, his voice as smooth as a vintage sherry. You have been a most persistent thorn in my side. But I'm afraid this is the part of the story where the detective finds the wrong answer. He stepped aside, and another figure emerged from the shadows behind him. A woman, her face a perfect, terrifying mirror of Sophia's, but her eyes were vacant, her movements jerky and mechanical. Meet Beatrice, Rivas said, gesturing to the woman. She's been very eager to see her sister again. And she brought a gift. Beatrice held up a small, ticking device, wired to a cellular phone. The timer on the screen was glowing red. 0:15, 0:14, 0:12, 0:11. The red glow of the timer pulsed like a dying heart. In the cramped, salt-eroded space of the shack, the air became heavy with the scent of ozone and Rivas's expensive, cloying cologne. The beauty of this, Silas, Rivas said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's, "is that the police will find 4 bodies. A tragic reunion. A disturbed sister, a vengeful heiress, a meddling Englishman, and his unfortunate ward. The fire at the villa was the overture. This is the finale." "Logic, Rivas," I said, my hands raised, fingers splayed. I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Beatrice. Her eyes were fixed on the timer, but her pupils weren't dilated the way they should have been under scopolamine. A man of your precision doesn't leave his life to a cell phone trigger in a shack with bad reception. 008-007. "Lola, the magnetic coil!" I barked. Lola didn't hesitate. She didn't reach for a weapon. She slammed her laptop shut and thrust it toward the ticking device in Beatrice's hand. The powerful neodymium magnets in the laptop's hard drive and speakers, combined with a quick burst script she'd keyed in, created a localized electromagnetic spike. The timer flickered. The red digits froze at 0:05. "A temporary glitch, nothing more," Rivas hissed, his composure finally cracking. He leveled the silenced pistol at my forehead. "I'll do it the old-fashioned way." But Beatrice moved. She didn't move like a drugged patient. She moved with the fluid, lethal speed of a predator. She didn't drop the bomb. She swung it like a flail, the heavy casing catching Rivas across the bridge of his nose. The sound of breaking bone was wet and sharp. Rivas went down, the silenced pistol skittering across the floorboards. "Sophia, run!" I yelled, lunging for the gun. But Sophia didn't run. She stood frozen, staring at Beatrice. Beatrice stood over the crumpled lawyer, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the clarity in her gaze, a cold, piercing intelligence that had been honed in the dark rooms of San Pedro. "He thought he was using me," Beatrice rasped, her voice a rusted echo of Sophia's. "But I was the one, reading his files. I was the one, changing the dosages." "The gait," I whispered, reaching the pistol. "The limp. You weren't switching legs. You were imitating both your sisters. You weren't patient 7042. You were the ghost and the observer." Suddenly, the shack's walls were bathed in a blinding white light. A megaphone boomed from the darkness outside, the voice distorted by the salt air. "This is the Guardia Civil. Drop your weapons and exit with your hands visible." "Thorne's friends," Lola whispered, peering through a gap in the wood. "They aren't here for an arrest, Silas. They have rifles. Long-range optics. They're here to clean the site." I looked at the bomb. The timer began to pulse again. The electromagnetic interference from Lola's laptop was fading. 0:04-0:03. "It's not a bomb," Beatrice said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "It's a transmitter. If it reaches 0, every account Rivas stole from, every shell company in Panama, the data goes to the hacienda and the press. He's not trying to kill us with an explosion. He's trying to stop the broadcast. Then we can't let it stop," I said. A bullet shattered the window above my head, a high-velocity round from a sniper rifle. The cleaning crew had started their work. "Lola, can you bridge the signal?" I asked, shielding Sophia with my body. "I need 3 minutes and a clear line to the satellite," Lola shouted, dragging her gear toward the back door. "But Silas, the sniper has the ridge covered." I looked at Beatrice. She looked at Sophia. 2 mirrors, one shattered, one polished. "I'll give you the 3 minutes," Beatrice said. She picked up Rivas's discarded pistol and a heavy fisherman's coat. "Wait!" Sophia cried out. But Beatrice was already moving toward the front door, the door that was directly in the line of fire. She wasn't just going out there to fight, she was going out there to be the distraction. She was going to play the role of Sofia Valero one last time. As she stepped into the spotlight, the world outside erupted into a cacophony of gunfire and shouting. The night outside disintegrated into a strobe light nightmare. Muzzle flashes from the ridge lit up the peeling paint of the shack like bursts of silent lightning. I heard the staccato rhythm of a Heckler & Koch MP5, not the standard issue of the local police, but the preferred tool of the cleaners Rivas had on his payroll. Beatrice vanished into the haze of gun smoke, her silhouette a fleeting ghost in the crossfire. "Lola! The bridge!" I yelled, pinning Rivas to the floor with my knee as he groaned, clutching his shattered face. "Done!" Lola screamed, slamming her laptop shut. "The data is hitting every major news server from Madrid to London. The transmission is out of the bottle, Silas. You can't put the smoke back in the cigar." The gunfire outside stopped abruptly. Silence is often more terrifying than noise in this business. It means the hunters are changing their tactics. "Sophia," I said, turning to the woman shivering in the corner. "It's over. The police, the real ones from the Malaga precinct, will be here in 10 minutes. Rivas is finished." Sophia looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face a mask of tragedy. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, lace-trimmed handkerchief to wipe a smudge of soot from her cheek. The scent hit me then. Not the sharp, metallic tang of the shack. Not the ozone of the bomb. Lavender. The scent of the dead sister. The scent Sophia had claimed she hated, the one she said only Elena and Beatrice used. I froze. My mind raced back to the guest wing at Las Sombras. The glasses. The cigarette. The Spanish earth lipstick. I looked at the woman before me, the woman I had pulled from a burning basement, the woman I had protected from snipers. "You're a remarkable actress," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Lola looked up, sensing the shift in the room. "Silas? What are you doing?" "Logic, Lola," I said, not taking my eyes off Sophia. "The woman who went out that door to die for us, that wasn't the mad sister Beatrice. That was the real Sofia Valero. The sister who spent 10 years feeling guilty for a crash she didn't cause." The woman in front of me stopped trembling. Her posture straightened. The victim disappeared, replaced by something cold, ancient, and terrifyingly sharp. She pulled the gold case from her sleeve, extracted a Sobranie Black Russian, and lit it with Rivas's discarded lighter. "When did you know, Mr. Croft?" Elena Valero asked, blowing a thin stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "The lipstick," I said. "Sophia's Spanish earth is a matte finish. It doesn't smudge. But the marks on your wrists from the zip ties? They were clean. You weren't tied up, Elena. You were holding the ties in place. You staged the basement scene. You knew Thorne would try to burn the files, and you needed him to do it so you could die one last time and emerge as the sole heir." "And Beatrice?" Lola asked, her voice trembling with rage. "Beatrice died 10 years ago in Ronda," I said. "There were no triplets. Only 2 sisters. Elena and Sophia. Elena was the rebel, the one who faked her death to escape a family that was a gilded cage. She spent a decade in the shadows, watching Rivas bleed the estate dry, waiting for the perfect moment to return and reclaim it all. She used the legend of a third sister to confuse me, to give herself a ghost to hide behind." Elena smiled. It was a beautiful, lethal expression. "Sophia was weak, Silas. She was ready to give the fortune away to a convent. I couldn't let that happen. The Valero name means something. It means murder," I said. "You led the snipers to this shack. You wanted Beatrice, the fake you created from Sophia, to be silenced. You wanted Rivas dead. And you wanted me to witness your survival so I could testify to your innocence. And now?" Elena asked, flicking ash onto Rivas's tailored suit. "The data is out. Rivas is going to jail. I am the victim who returned from the grave. Who will believe a disgraced lawyer and an unlicensed detective?" "I will," a voice said from the doorway. Beatrice, the woman who had gone out into the gunfire, stood there. She was bleeding from a graze on her shoulder, her dark coat shredded. But she wasn't a ghost. And she wasn't Sophia. "Meet the real Elena," I said to the woman with the cigarette. The woman in the shack gasped, the Sobranie falling from her lips. The twist, my dear, is that I didn't believe either of you. I continued. Lola didn't just broadcast the financial records. She broadcast the audio from this shack for the last 5 minutes. The Guardia Civil outside aren't Thorne's men. They're the internal affairs team I called from Marbella before we even left the villa. The real Sophia, the one who had pretended to be Beatrice to test my loyalty, stepped into the room. It's over, Elena. You were always better at the shadows. But you forgot that shadows need a light to exist. As the handcuffs clicked onto Elena's wrists, I walked out of the shack and stood on the beach. The sun was beginning to rise over the Alboran Sea, a pale, cold orange. Silas? Lola said, walking up beside me. We didn't get paid for this one, did we? We got the truth, Lola, I said, lighting my own pipe. In Spain, that's usually more expensive than gold. I looked back at the ruins of the night. The mirror was broken. The sisters were divided. And the Earl Grey in my apartment was going to be very, very cold by the time I got home.